It's June 1964. A wealthy businessman lies dead in his Key Biscayne condominium. The scene is brutal. Over 30 stab wounds, a glass bowl used to strike the final blows. And just a few miles away from him, a woman is about to become the center of it all. Candace Mossler sits calmly as the questions begin to close in. Murder allegations, rumors, a taboo affair. And beside her is the man drawing just as much attention, her nephew, Melvin Powers. Their closeness doesn't go unnoticed, and soon the headlines will begin to say more. Much, much more. Because this isn't just an ordinary murder investigation. It's a scandal. It's the early hours of June 30th, 1964, in Key Biscayne, Florida. Inside a waterfront condominium, millionaire businessman Mossler lies dead. The scene is violent, intimate, and deeply unsettling. He has been stabbed 39 times, the attack frenzied and prolonged, before a glass bowl is used to deliver additional blows. Investigators immediately sense that this is not a random burglary. The level of violence suggests something personal, a crime driven by emotion rather than opportunity. But who would want to kill a kind, wealthy, well-connected businessman in his own home? Attention quickly turns to the people closest to him, and at the center of that circle is his wife, Candace Mossler. By all public accounts, Candace is just the perfect wife. She appears to embody the image of a glamorous socialite, attractive, soft-spoken, and often described as having a childlike voice that contrasts with the sophistication of the world she moves in. Friends portray her as charming and warm, and some insist she has no evil bone in her body. The woman wouldn't even hurt a housefly that was bothering her. Candace has 2 children from her first marriage, and she and have adopted 4 orphans together, having a total of 6 children. Together, they are the all-American family, the pinnacle of what should be a polished, affluent family. Their lifestyle reflects significant wealth. Provides generously, funding luxury apartments, designer clothing, and frequent travel. Candace hosts elaborate dinner parties, attends high-profile social events, and circulates within elite circles. Jewelry, furs, and expensive wardrobes become part of her public identity. She cultivates a reputation for philanthropy, often more than ever, donating to charitable causes, particularly those involving children, which further enhances her standing in society. Bills for hotels, restaurants, and shopping trips accumulate into the thousands, yet they are routinely covered by her millionaire husband, To many observers, she appears to be living an enviable life built on stability, status, and financial security. Is also known for his generosity beyond his immediate household. He assists relatives and acquaintances, offering financial support and opportunities when needed. Among those who benefit from this generosity is his nephew by marriage, Melvin Powers. Younger, less established, and recently released from prison, Melvin spends increasing amounts of time around the couple. He reaches out to his mother's younger sister, Candace, seeking financial aid from his uncle-in-law, and he is easily welcomed by the generous couple into their social world, travels with them, and gradually becomes a familiar presence. The relationship appears ordinary, a wealthy uncle helping a younger family member. But as Melvin's presence grows more frequent, observers begin noticing the closeness between him and his aunt, Candace. They are seen together often, sometimes without Candace visits him at work. They visit the Mosslers' family ranch together without and often spend a lot of time in solitude with each other. About a year and a half into Melvin's move-in, their interactions begin to attract quiet speculation. Rumors begin circulating, suggesting that their relationship seems to extend beyond family ties. These rumors, never conclusively proven, introduce a scandalous element to the case. The prosecution uses it as the root cause of the murder. Testimony references claims from individuals who say they observed unusually intimate behavior. An employee reportedly told that he saw Candace and Melvin kissing. Others described their closeness in ways that raise questions. In court, prosecutors suggest that the relationship may have provided motive, arguing that a combination of financial dependency, marital strain, and personal attachment could have created tension. The narrative begins to shift. What first appears to be a brutal, isolated killing now becomes entangled with wealth, family, and alleged betrayal. A combination that captures public attention and sets the stage for one of the most sensational trials of the decade. It would only be a matter of time until Jock confirms his speculations about Candace and Melvin. Shocked and furious, Jock contemplates divorce, convinced that the betrayal is undeniable. Yet, he hesitates. A public split could ignite scandal, ruin the carefully cultivated image of the Mosslers as a glamorous, influential couple, and fuel endless speculation about their private lives. In the world they inhabit, perception is everything. So, he and Candace agree to maintain appearances, living largely separate lives while the marriage continues on paper. By the early 1960s, the arrangement has become a routine. Rumors swirl that Jock may be homosexual, favoring the company of men, a detail that adds complexity to the decision to preserve the facade of a perfect marriage. Candace receives a generous spending allowance of $5,000 per week, roughly $47,000 today, covering luxury apartments, designer wardrobes, expensive jewelry, and high-profile social events. Her life is a continuous carousel of dinner parties, charity galas, and private gatherings among the wealthy elite. She maintains her reputation as a charming, philanthropic socialite, soft-spoken and childlike, yet calculated in presence. To outsiders, she is living a life most would only dream of, supported by a husband who continues to fund her every whim while their marital bond quietly frays. But despite the separation, Candace regularly visits Jock with their 6 children, sustaining a semblance of family normalcy. Though the tension does linger beneath the surface, financial dependency, societal expectations, and the ever-present question of Melvin's influence on Candace create a volatile mix, one that will soon intersect tragically with the events of June 29, 1964. On one of Candace's visits with the children, the day proceeds routinely. Candace and the children spend time at the beach, returning later to the Mossler condominium. However, throughout the day, Candace continues to complain of persistent migraines, noting the discomfort, but still attending to the children and household obligations. Then, towards midnight, the migraines have become too much to bear. So Candace places the children in the car and informs Jock that she is leaving to seek treatment for her headache. The streets of Key Biscayne are quiet as she drives, first to purchase stamps, then continues to a local hospital for medical care. While at the hospital, she reportedly receives 3 calls from an unidentified number. The caller is never identified, and the content of the calls is unclear. Meanwhile, inside the Mossler condominium, an intruder, or someone with access to the home, confronts Jock Mossler. They draw a knife and begin to stab Jock incessantly. Over the course of the assault, he is stabbed 39 times. The blows are delivered with intensity and persistence, indicating a calculated and personal attack rather than a spontaneous act of violence. To ensure the victim is completely incapacitated, a heavy object, later identified as a glass bowl from the apartment, is used to strike his head. Outside the condominium, neighbors begin noticing disturbances, and around 1 a.m., a dog barks incessantly. From nearby apartments, people report hearing heavy thuds, muffled groans, and what sounds like a struggle. But no one ever really interferes. Then, at approximately 4 a.m., Candace Mossler returns with her children. She enters the residence and is immediately confronted with the scene of Jock's death. Shocked, she screams, drawing the attention of the children. Her eldest teenage daughter approaches and sees Jock lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by blood. Acting quickly, the daughter dials the police and officers arrive shortly afterward, securing the scene and beginning their investigation. They then document the violent sequence that led to the death of Jock. Almost as soon as the news broke that Jock Mossler had been killed, the story exploded into public view. Newspapers and radio reports carried the headline across the country: a wealthy financier, bludgeoned and stabbed early in his own Key Biscayne condominium. The brutal nature of the attack, combined with the high-profile status of the victim, guaranteed national attention. In the earliest interviews with police, Candace Mossler offers possible explanations for her husband's death. At first, she suggests it may have been a burglary gone wrong, the work of a thief who entered the home, encountered Jaak unexpectedly, and violence erupted. When officers indicate they suspect the victim knew his attacker and that the crime appears personal, she revises her account. She proposes that Jaak was a closeted homosexual who often brought men home, suggesting that a lover, resentful or scorned, might have been responsible. She further posits that Jaak also had many enemies through his business dealings, drawing attention to the fact that he once owned companies that repossessed property. In interviews and news reports, she hints that a business rival, resentful debtor, or someone seeking revenge could have committed the killing. These early public statements, mixing burglary, jealous lovers, and professional enemies, help drive intense media interest, feeding speculation from every angle. However, investigators do end up uncovering physical evidence that raises additional questions. A palm print is found on the kitchen counter of the Mossler residence that matches that of Melvin Powers, Candace's nephew, and one of the focal figures in the emerging scandal. Detectives note that Jaak had previously fired Powers from his business and ordered him to leave the family home, hiring security guards to escort him off the property after learning of rumors linking him romantically to Candace. However, forensic experts warn that it is impossible to determine when the palm print was left, and no conclusive timeline can be established for its presence. Police also locate one of the Mossler's cars, a white Chevrolet, at the Miami airport in the early morning hours following the murder. The vehicle, which Candace had provided to Powers during his visit, is tested for evidence. Investigators find multiple fingerprints belonging to Powers inside the car, along with flecks of blood matching the victims. Despite the presence of prints and blood, experts testify that these findings somehow cannot definitively prove when the prints were made or that Powers was present at the moment of the attack. As the focus shifts toward possible suspects, suspicion quickly settles on Powers and Candace. In response, Candace immediately begins assembling a formidable defense. With her personal accounts frozen during the investigation, she puts up valuable jewelry, including diamonds, furs, and other luxury items given to her by Jaak, as collateral for the retainers of some of the most prominent defense lawyers in the country. Among them is famed Texas attorney Percy Foreman, known for securing acquittals in high-profile cases, a sign that the defense intends to contest every aspect of the prosecution's theory. The press coverage continues to build. Reporters describe the case as a mix of sex, wealth, family betrayal, and murder, a story that goes far beyond a simple homicide. Headlines routinely frame the narrative around scandal and intrigue long before the trial ever begins. The trial of Candace Mossler and Melvin Lane Powers begins in January 1966 and quickly becomes the most closely watched criminal proceeding in Florida. From the moment jury selection starts on January 17th, the public's fascination is evident. The courtroom fills to capacity each day, with spectators arriving hours before proceedings begin, some lining up before dawn to secure seats that will often be occupied through the lunch recess. Reporters and photographers crowd the gallery, and the press corps expands coverage far beyond regional outlets as newspapers and magazines from across the country assign their best correspondents to the case. Speaking for the prosecution team, State Attorney Arthur Hutto lays out the state's theory in stark terms. He argues that the murder is the result of a sordid, illicit love affair between Candace Mossler and her nephew, Melvin Powers, and that the motive is financial gain. With Jaak Mossler dead, Candace would inherit the bulk of his estate and live out the rest of her life with Melvin. Hutto also calls attention to Powers' resentment after being dismissed from Jaak's business, claiming that Powers once told Mossler, "I'll be back and you will regret this the longest day of your life." Over the course of 3 weeks, the prosecution calls numerous witnesses, including several individuals who claim that the defendants either solicited a hit on Jaak or spoke about removing him from the picture. One witness, ex-convict Freddie Duhart, testifies that Powers offered him $10,000 to find a hired killer, even suggesting a plan involving a body being taken across the border and dumped into a volcano. Another man, Edward Deal, says Melvin approached him with a similar request. And yet another witness, Billy Frank Mulvey, claims that Candace paid him a down payment to kill her husband and that Powers confessed involvement while the two were in jail together preceding the trial. These testimonies are dramatic, but they also prove controversial. Several of the witnesses have criminal histories, and their credibility is repeatedly questioned by defense attorneys throughout the trial. When Mulvey alleges that Powers confessed to him in jail, Candace reacts in court shouting, "I never seen or heard of this man," prompting a rebuke from the judge. Defense strategy focuses sharply on undermining the prosecution's reliance on these witnesses and on casting doubt about the strength of the evidence. Percy Foreman, Melvin's lead counsel and one of the most prominent defense attorneys in the country, reframes the narrative by challenging the relevance and reliability of the testimony, emphasizing reasonable doubt. He notes that although Melvin's palm print was found in the Mossler apartment, numerous unidentified prints are also present and no definitive timeline can be established for their placement. Throughout the trial, Candace Mossler maintains a composed presence. From the witness stand to interactions outside the courtroom, she presents herself as a mother concerned for her family. On several occasions, she emphasizes her role as a parent, reinforcing her focus on her children and their well-being amid the accusations. Though she never takes the stand in her own defense, her demeanor and occasional responses to witness testimony shape public perception of her throughout the proceedings. Prosecutors and defense attorneys deliver extensive closing arguments. Hutto attempts to summarize the state's case in terms rooted in motive and alleged conspiracy. In contrast, the foreman's closing address, nearly 5 hours long, highlights perceived flaws in the prosecution's case, the questionable credibility of key witnesses, and the principle that circumstantial evidence must leave the jury with reasonable doubt. After more than 2 days of deliberations, the jury returns a verdict: not guilty for both Melvin Powers and Candace Mossler. The judge accepts the verdict and releases the defendants. Melvin leans back in his seat, smirks, and whispers, "Beautiful." Outside the courthouse doors, a crowd has already gathered. Journalists, curious onlookers, and supporters drawn by the months of sensational headlines. Among them are women and mothers who see more than just a woman walking free. To some, she represents a mother who has endured intense scrutiny and stood her ground amid allegations that threatened not only her freedom, but her identity as a parent. One of the first shouts from the crowd is a cheer for her children, a murmur of admiration mixed with relief. Candace steps onto the courthouse steps, the press cordon tightening around her as she raises her voice just enough to be heard over the swirl of cameras and questions. She then smiles and tells the assembled reporters, "Thank you, and for my children."